Hey, everybody, welcome back to Dental Unfiltered. I'm Matt Brown. I'm here with my normal co-host, Dr. Andrew Vallo. We have an awesome episode for you today that we're really excited and proud of. You know, we always say this, please hit like, subscribe, share. We don't accept sponsors. Everybody we bring on is vetted by the two of us as being somebody who's valued in the marketplace. We do this purely as an investment in you guys, and it's something we're both really passionate about. So please like, subscribe, leave a review, and share. So today we have an awesome episode that me and Dr. Vallo are super excited about. We started this thing a while ago, and I remember us having our first meeting and Andrew being like, we're going to run out of stuff to talk about. And I'm like, I don't think so. Dental's pretty complex. And he's, no, I think we're going to. Well, we're here at the 100th episode, 250,000 listens. And apparently there's a lot to talk about and people like it because we're averaging like 4,000 listens an episode. So, you know, first, Dr. Vallo, how does 100th episode feel?
Yeah, man, this is kind of crazy because looking back at the beginning, and I do from time to time, I'll go back and look at some of our first couple episodes. And honestly, guys, for some of our newer listeners, if you haven't gone back and listened to like those first 10 episodes, I would strongly encourage that. While some of my systems may have changed slightly since back then, I would say for the most part, we're doing most things very similarly, or at least the main principles apply. And there were some really, really great episodes at the beginning where I did some deep dives into some of our systems and growth strategies, like, you know, the deep dive on how we get our Google reviews. So at this point in time, my organization has thousands of Google reviews. I have one practice with over 2,000 reviews. I have multiple practices with over 500 reviews. So if you want to know exactly my system for how I get all of these Google reviews, go back and listen to that episode. I think that was one of the first 10 episodes we did for sure. I did an episode all about how to have an Invisalign party. So again, for those that don't know, I throw these Invisalign parties a couple times a year. We get at our best Invisalign party, we close 52 new Invisalign cases in one afternoon. But our last couple, we've kind of averaged between 40 and that 52, or maybe it was 53, high number. But if you want to know exactly how to do an Invisalign party, go back and listen to that episode. If you want to know how my flagship office routinely would get 250 plus new patients per month, I have an episode all about the deep dive into my marketing strategies that I use for my startups. So often when I see people post questions in these dental Facebook groups, and they're asking for like some kind of advice or recommendation, I find that a lot of times when I'm posting a specific episode, it is one of those first 10 episodes. Not that there aren't a lot of other great episodes and a lot of other great things we've talked about. And again, we've done some kind of like revisit episodes where, you know, maybe I've enhanced the system or changed the system or added some levels of sophistication or whatever it is. So I mean, maybe I'm biased. I do think all of our episodes have a lot of valuable content, actionable content. But again, if you just started listening in the last few months or even the last year, and you didn't start at the beginning and listen to those first 10 episodes, I'd strongly encourage you to go back and listen to them.
You know, it's 100 episodes is pretty neat, unique, and kind of our, like, I guess, popularity in dental has changed a lot. Like, I mean, I think me and you both get messages all the time, docs asking questions. Somehow my phone number's gotten out there to a few docs, and I get these phone calls, and I'm like, hey, what's up? And they're like, hey, I have a question. I'm like, are you a client? And they're like, no, I just got your phone number from so-and-so and listen to your podcast, and I have a question. And I'm like, all right, I'm okay with it. I don't love my number getting out there, but there's ways to contact me, email me. You know, my assistant will bring them to me, and I go through them, or DM me on Facebook. They're the best ways to get the best response. But it really kind of makes you feel good that practice owners like see you as a knowledge source, and they take what you say seriously. 5 years ago, I was the new guy in dentistry, and no one was like, everyone was like the guy with, you know, the guy with one leg. Like, what's he know, right? We even had people like, oh, he's a martial arts guy, not a dental guy, right?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years ago, I was an associate dentist, and now I'm about to open my 10th office, and you know, we should break 15 million in revenue this year. So a lot has changed in the last 5 years. And I would say a lot's changed even in the last 2 years. I guess it's been a little bit under 2 years since we started the podcast, but a lot has changed in that time period as well.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting. And I think what's been really exciting is the guests we've had on the show. we've had the top personalities in dental, like the top three probably. So really quick, I would love to know who your three favorite guests were.
I always hate choosing favorites and stuff, man. That's
The three guests that you were excited about learning from.
no, I mean, I think we maybe spoke briefly on this in another episode, but I think our very first guest, I believe, was Dr. Mark Costas, and so I consider him one of my mentors. I'm in his mastermind group, DSI. I actually just hosted our Southeast Regional Mastermind, for the docs in the Southeast region just last week. So Mark and some of the other guys I know were in town, and my business partner Sasha, he was able to get us a reservation at Burns Steakhouse, which for those you don't know is like it's the hardest reservation in Tampa. It's opened in 1956. They've got 1 million bottles of wine. I believe it's like the largest wine collection in North America or something like that. It's crazy. So very, very, very cool dining experience. It's one of those like 4 or 5 hour dinners. And of course, the only reservation we could get was at 9 p.m. the night before our mastermind event. So we show up there at 9 o'clock. I think we left the restaurant at like 1:30 in the morning. I couldn't even believe that they were still open. Like supposedly they close at 10 o'clock, but I mean, I guess they take their last reservation at 10 o'clock or whatever. So like we were doing a food and wine tour or a kitchen and wine cellar tour at like 12:30. We went up to the dessert room and had dessert and, after dinner drinks and all that stuff.
Why have you never taken me to this place when I visit Tampa? This sounds awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that works on a rolling reservation. So like, and they've fill up immediately. So like you have to be on your game, and it's hard. Even if you like know people in Tampa, it's really hard to like have someone get you a reservation, that type of a thing. But we got lucky there. Although we were all pretty tired that next morning when Mark texted me at 7 a.m. to see if I was ready to drive everyone to the mastermind event from the hotel. So, but we got ourselves moving. We got there. I think we had a really, really good event. And so it was definitely cool to have one of my mentors who I had listened to for years, speaking on his podcast as our first true guest. And so that was an awesome episode. I'd say probably Paul Goodman. Again, someone who I look up to, I admire. I really like his positive spin that he tries to put on the community of dentistry. I like his Facebook group. And so it was very cool to have him on as a guest. And then last one, man, that's tough. A lot of really amazing guests we've had on. I would say maybe Dr. Chris Phelps. Somebody I had heard a lot on podcasts, and I really admire his kind of spins on some of his marketing ideas. I think he's very creative when it comes to marketing. And that's something that I feel like I have taken to is if you market like everybody else, you're going to get results like everybody else. So I'm always looking for how can I push the envelope? How can I, find a new method, a new offer, a new spin on things, a new shiny toaster to grab attention, a new marketing medium, whatever it is. I'm always looking for that next best thing that can really enhance my marketing game. And I feel like Dr. Phelps was an inspiration there. So those are probably my top three. But again, it was really hard to choose because I feel like we've had just like dozens of amazing guests over these hundreds of episodes or 100 episodes.
So my top three are a little different. Paul Goodman's definitely my top three. My number one is probably less known than most, but I think he's super important because I think his brain has influenced a lot of dental companies that people don't realize it. Kelly Schwartz is my number one.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. That was a great episode too.
You knew I was going to say that?
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
Kelly, for me, when I first got into dentistry, I would like listen to podcasts, and whenever Kelly was on, it was like easier for me to understand. He speaks very clear and simply, and he's easy to listen to. So like I would like look for podcasts that Kelly was on. And he talks a lot about inner operations of the practice, which is what I had to learn. And then 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago at Intellicon. So 2 Intellicons ago, me and him both were on the promotional graphics. And somebody called me, Riley Beckton, our national sales director. And I think this was before he was working with us. And he called me and goes, dude, you're on a poster with Kelly Schwartz. That's a pretty big company, especially at Dental Intel. He's influenced a lot of their metrics. And I asked Ashley Best at DI, I was like, so can I meet Kelly Schwartz? She was like, yeah, nicest guy on the planet. And walk up to him and say hi. You can walk up to him and say hi. And for me, I kind of put him on a pedestal. And I was like, and I got to meet him. And then I was kind of like, I'm never speechless. This is going to sound total fanboy crap. But like, I had all these questions for him. And then he was in front of me. I like blanked out. And I was awkwardly uncomfortable. And I was like, you're awesome. Right. But having him on the show was really exciting. He's been on our show and on Management Unfiltered with Zach. I don't know if the episode's released yet. Actually, it just got recorded.
I think it came out already.
Did it come out already? Okay. So I think he's one of the most important brains in dentistry. And I consider him a mentor. Me and Kelly probably speak every other week. And I ask him questions and he explains things that I don't understand in dentistry. And he never has said something like, well, I'm not really familiar with that. I'll get back to you. That guy's been consulting in dental for like 20 or 30 years. Like super big brain. My number 2 is definitely Paul Goodman, which I knew we both were going to say. I think Paul might be one of the most important influencers across the entire dental world. Like, I think he's definitely a really important influencer. My number 3 is a weird one. Justin Withrow, the lawyer, is my number 3. He was our first repeat guest for 2 different subjects. And the reason he's my number 3 is there's subjects that affect dentists that they don't think about. And he provided really important information to make sure you're more effective in these scenarios and you have coverage. So he talked about when a dental board investigation happens, that you have coverage in your malpractice policy, that if you notify them in 14 days, there's a sum of money you can access to pay for your defense. And the other one was audits from insurance companies. And I think like they're the 2 biggest fears of a dentist. Like an audit and a dental board investigation, like make dentists shake. Like when they get that mail and they open it, they're like, oh, this sucks. Because they know it's going to be months of pain and heartache. And I think he alleviates a lot of that. And I think a lot of docs don't even know about the coverage and the malpractice policies. And Justin was really informative. And he was our first repeat guest. And I think it was some of the most important information I've ever heard for those 2 scenarios. And the fact that that's a big fear point for dentists, and he kind of deployed something that should lessen the fear, that was really impactful to me. And I tell every dentist I talk to, I work into the conversation. Do you know your malpractice insurance might have coverage for these 2 things? And every dentist says this. They go, I had no idea. And if they went through an audit, like, man, I should have known that. I just went through an audit and paid for it. So I feel like that was my 3rd. That was, he was really like, and not really 1 through 3, just 3 awesome people that I really enjoyed. And Paul Goodman was definitely awesome. For me, having Paul Goodman on was like having Michael Jordan on or someone really big and important. Like Paul's a pretty popular guy.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that you just said, especially the part of you never being speechless, because I've never seen that.
I really ended up in front of Kelly like a deer in headlights, and I was like, I had all these questions, now I can't remember any of them.
It's funny, our dental celebrities, huh? As far as Kelly goes, man, yeah, his content was great. As I mentioned, we implemented his idea of the follow-up treatment letter that we now send out. We get weekly reports of all the letters that are sent out from each office every single week. So, I mean, we are really, we are trying to create systematized accountability for we don't just implement a system and then hope that people do it. Like everything that we implement now, there are checks and balances to make sure that they're really happening. But that has been very effective for sure. Paul, yeah, man, I feel like Paul is just such like a positive force. And I feel like, generally speaking, I'm a pretty positive person. You know, I really like to think I've got this abundance mindset. I love to help other dentists, but there are even times where I think Paul has had to keep me in check. You know, send me a text and be like, "Hey, man, I understand where you're coming from, but like that comment was a little harsh. Maybe like tone it down, or just delete it or whatever." So
I've gotten yelled at, not yelled at, but I've gotten contacted.
Yeah, but he does it in such a friendly. How could you ever be mad at Paul? His texts, and again, this has maybe happened a couple times over the years, but someone will say something that I just totally disagree with or fires me up, and I'll respond. And maybe my response is like a little bit sarcastic or whatever, but Paul really does. He wants to promote this just like healthy, friendly, safe space for dentists and dental nachos. And, while some dentists might give him shit for it, I truly think it's a great thing. And I respect, it's his group. I respect his roles. So, he'll text me like, "Hey, AV, love you, man. That comment, a little too harsh. Maybe you could tone it down a bit. And of course, I'm going to do that. And then, yeah, dude, Justin, I think the thing is like, it really is not common knowledge when it comes to what we would do in those situations. I think, dentists either just hope that it never happens, pretends it's not a real thing, whatever it is. But like, if you're in that situation and all of a sudden you're facing an audit, you're facing a board complaint or whatever, like they never really taught you what to do in school. I don't think there's a lot of other podcasts out there that talk about what to do. So I agree. I think that that's super helpful knowledge to at least give you a basic understanding of what your game plan should be in those situations and like what you can expect and all that stuff. So I agree. Those were some great guests for sure.
One subject is how do we come up with these episodes, right? Now, every now and then I'll have an idea that I'll put in, and we have a podcast strategy meeting with this. You guys don't realize this. There's a whole support team behind this podcast. Like me and Andrew record it, and that's where our involvement begins and ends. And we have a podcast strategy meeting every couple of weeks to have all the important people on it that help support this and do production. So all post-production is done by my team, someone else, like our support team for this, right? But during those podcast strategy meetings, we bring forward episode ideas. And what I will tell you is Andrew will have like 6 and I will have like 1 because Andrew is a dentist on the front lines and I'm a support guy for dentists, right? So Andrew, how do you, like every time we do it, Andrew's like, this is what we're doing. How do you come up with the episodes?
It's actually funny, man, because while I will admit that I probably do come up with the majority of the topics for our podcast, they actually, most of them don't happen in the strategy session. So like, it's funny. Like I've toyed around with the idea of before being like, do we really need these strategy session meetings? Or like, do you really need me there? Because I feel like, I think they're important in the sense that like, we know how much content we have recorded and kind of what the plan is for some of the release dates. And maybe we talk about some like episode titles, or maybe like future guests and things like that. But like, for instance, when we're talking about mine and Matt's next podcast recording session, I like sometimes we get some advice from the team as far as like maybe some ideas or some things that listeners have been asking for. Sometimes like there is a little bit of like a list of ideas that we've come up with. But I feel like for the most part, what happens is literally what happened this morning is I texted Matt like the exact moment that he said, "Hey, I just sent you the link to record." I responded back with 4 episode titles of what I want to talk about today. And I think one of those episodes was discussed during the last strategy session, and the other 3 were ones I just came up with on the spot this morning. So I think the way I like to do it, honestly, is like, what have I been doing in my practices lately? Either like what's been a pain point for us that I want to talk about? What is like a new strategy that we're implementing that has been helpful? What's been a big win for us lately? Whatever it is, like what mistakes have I made that I want you guys to avoid? But I like to talk about what is fresh in my mind. So like, what have I been doing the last couple of weeks that I feel like is going to be relevant? Because I feel like at that point, I'm able to best cover that subject matter because it really is something I'm in the middle of going through right now versus just like a random topic. I'm like, okay, like let's talk about this. I would say maybe like 10 to 20% of our podcast episodes come from the strategy sessions. Probably another 10% come from requests from other dentists, via Facebook or email or whatever. That was like the associate compensation model. I had a few different people ask me about that before we recorded that one. And I would say the rest just come from like spur of the moment, me sitting either at the gym or in my car, like driving to the little corporate office I have and thinking, what am I dealing with right now? That would be great content for an episode. And that's where most of this content's coming.
I have a question. A lot of times the influencers, the personalities come on and they actually end up affecting your operations. Like a lot of learning happens on these podcasts. So like a lot of times docs come to us or come to the podcast and listen to it and they're trying to learn from Dr. Vallo and Matt on some level, but it's more Dr. Vallo, right? But then we have these guests come on and I think you learn. I mean, like there's times you learn stuff and implement it, right? Like the Kelly Schwartz thing. How much has the guests kind of influenced the way you think about things as a dentist?
I'm going to even step back from the podcast and I'm just going to say life in general. I am the type of person where I am very open-minded when it comes to business ideas. I do not feel like I have to, reinvent the wheel or come up with all of my own. Now, this contradicts what I said earlier about like, hey, don't do what everyone else is doing. And I totally agree with that. Don't go out there and do what 90% of the dentists are doing, because you're going to get the same results as 90% of the dentists. I look to what is a top 10% doing? What is a top 10% of dentists or dental consultants or, whoever it is, like, what are the very best people doing? And listen to them and ask questions and like figure out why they're doing it that way. And then what I'll often do is put my own spin on it. So I will say, like, that's where my innovation comes in, is I look for people that are doing things that I want to do, and I take their ideas and I ask them questions about it, and I get a good understanding of it. And then I try to figure out how their idea is going to best work in my practice. And often I'm making small tweaks, but it really is like, it's not like all these original ideas. So I don't want you guys like to sit there and think that like, oh, like Dr. Vallo is successful because he just, sits there and brainstorms and comes up with all these innovative ideas. It's not true at all. I consume a lot of content still, even with 10 practices and a 2-year-old and my own podcast that I do, I still consume a ton of content. I listen to podcasts at the gym. I would say 80% of the time I'm at the gym, it's podcasts. The other 20% is music. Maybe if I'm having a rough day or I'm trying to really get a harder lifting or whatever. But mostly it's podcast content. If I'm doing cardio, it's always podcast content. If I'm just kind of sitting around the house doing some chores or whatever, often listen to podcast content. I read books. I mean, I've got a stack of books just waiting, to get to. So I'm always looking for great book recommendations. I'm in multiple dental mastermind groups. I honestly invest a significant amount of money in business acumen and leadership training, both dental specific and non-dental, because again, I know that I'm not the smartest person out there. And there's a lot of other very, very smart people that have already figured it out. And if I can just learn from them, I can save myself a lot of time. And again, it doesn't mean that you just copy and paste. I think you've got to consider everything in terms of your practice and your group and your goals. So I think it is important to evaluate the systems that others are recommending. And I would say that for my systems too, guys. Like, if you're listening and you hear an episode about one of my systems, like, don't just take that verbatim and stick it into your practice or stick it into your office manual or whatever. Like, contemplate it. Think about like how that's going to interact with your office, with your team, with your patients, and like put your own spin on it if you feel like it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's, all podcasts kind of, if you really kind of do it, it really influences you, like really dedicated to listening. And reality is, the fastest way to get from A to B is to watch someone else do it and replicate the process. And you have to pick and choose what things you put in your toolbox based on your conditions, their conditions. Like, if a doc is in rural America and you're in a metropolitan area and he's telling you how to run your practice and grow, those conditions are very different, right? You have to look at things very intelligently and be like, this person I'm taking advice with, does it really apply to my scenario? And maybe the whole thing doesn't, but maybe one tool does, right? But then there's another, advisor, or doc, or subject matter expert who, has better conditions, and maybe you get 4 tools from them, right? So I think it's very smart when you look at these things to look at the conditions these people are operating in.
I was just going to piggyback on that real quick before we wrap up here, but I think that's a great point, Matt. And I often I would say one of the things that I'm most frequently asked is, how do you find associates? How do you hire associates? What type of associate? So at this point, guys, I've got 12 associate docs. We'll soon be 13. And I always give other dentists the caveat that I'm in big city. I'm in Tampa, Florida. I'm in Miami, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm in big cities where a lot of dentists want to live. And I have a plethora of associate dentists here. And I have associate dentists that want to move here because, it's a desirable place with warm weather and palm trees and beaches. So I always give that caveat to my friends that are in more rural places where it's harder to find associates, that like, you're probably not going to be able to find associates with the same ease that I am. You might not be able to find them in the same ways that I do. You might not have the ability to be as picky and choosy as I am when it comes to associates, but like, this is how I do it. So again, I think that is a great example right there, where if you're in a different demographic and it's really hard to attract associate there, you probably can't just get associates from word of mouth and maybe an Indeed posting here or there, and then have 40 associate docs apply and have really stringent criteria and pick the best of the best. Like, your approach is probably going to have to be different. You might have to go to dental schools, and you might have to try to recruit and offer moving bonuses and bigger sign-on bonuses. And I've never hired a new grad. I have hired dentists, or I am about to hire a dentist that is graduating for the second time in the States. So we're a foreign trained dentist, but like, I have never hired a dentist fresh out of dental school with no real world dental experience. But if you're in some of these areas, you probably have to do that. And if that's the case, your training and onboarding probably has to be different. That was another conversation we had. My training and onboarding for my associates, I think it's solid, but I don't think a brand new grad associate would do well, because I don't think there's enough mentorship. I don't think there's enough oversight for a new grad to ensure that they're going to be successful in that environment. So I'm looking for docs that they already know the dentistry. They don't really need help with that. They just need to kind of learn our systems, maybe learn a little bit about diagnosis, treatment, presentation, communication, things like that. So anyways, Matt, I do know we got to wrap this up. We got a few more episodes to get through today. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. For anyone out there that has listened to all of our episodes, if you've listened to every single episode, Matt and I are going to have a prize for one of these listeners. So if you've listened to every episode, honestly, go ahead and send me an email at docvallodds@gmail.com. And one of you guys that emails me that has listened to every single episode, we will have a prize and we will select a winner on one of the future episodes. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Hey guys, thank you for joining us. Like I said, we don't do sponsors. We don't make money off this. The one thing that we really love is if you guys would like, subscribe, share, comment, and kind of share the content with the rest of your dental colleagues. That really motivates us. Thank you so much for joining us, guys, and have a great day.